Hi everybody, I'm Ron. Some of y'all know me from my model railroad YouTube channel, Ron's Trains and Things. But today I'm here to talk to you not about model railroading, but another subject that is near and dear to my heart. It's November, and for most people that means Thanksgiving. But where I'm from, there's another very important 10-day long holiday that we celebrate before Thanksgiving comes. It's what we call deer season. When deer season rolls around, I begin to think about being out in the woods, and I also begin to think about the delicious taste of venison. Today I'm going to show you how to make one of my specialties, which is my deer jerky, which has become rather famous among my family and close friends. And I'm going to show you exactly how I make it today. The first step in the process of making my deer jerky is to make a marinade. And in front of me you see the ingredients to that marinade. It includes 6 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, 3 tablespoons of soy sauce, 3 tablespoons of teriyaki sauce, 1 teaspoon of hickory-flavored liquid smoke, your favorite hot sauce to taste. For me, that means 2 teaspoons of Cholula, 2 teaspoons of black pepper, a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder and a 1/4 teaspoon of onion powder, 1/8 teaspoon of cayenne pepper or ground red pepper. You combine all of those ingredients together, and then the last 2 ingredients are where you can add some variety for your own taste. Because the next ingredient is 3 cups of some type of pepper sauce. Now I've used 3 different types of pepper sauce for this marinade, and it gives you 3 very distinctly different flavors. You can use the juice that comes out of commercially sold jars of banana peppers. This has a nice vinegary and just slightly hot flavor to it. It makes a really good tasting jerky. If you want something just slightly hotter but a very similar flavor, you can use the same amount, 3 cups, of the sauce that comes out of hot chili peppers that are pickled and sold commercially. Now, if I'm using either the juice from the banana peppers or from the chili peppers, I also add 1 cup of brown sugar, just to give a little bit of sweetness to the jerky. Now, what I'm doing today is a little bit different, and so I'm not going to need the brown sugar at all. Because instead of the banana pepper or chili pepper juice, I'm using something of my own creation. Last fall, I canned several pints of candied jalapenos. I discovered that whenever I jarred the jalapenos and the sauce, I had a lot of sauce left over. This was a wonderful, sweet, hot sauce with some great spices and a fantastic flavor. I decided it might be good to use in my jerky marinade, so I saved almost a gallon of it in quart jars in my refrigerator. Today, I'm using 3 cups of that candied jalapeno juice in my marinade. Now, because this is candied jalapeno juice, it has a lot of sugar in it, so I'm not going to be adding any brown sugar to the marinade. To make the marinade, you simply add all of these ingredients together in a large bowl, mix them up thoroughly, and then let them stand for at least an hour, preferably 2. That gives an opportunity for all of your dry ingredients to completely soak up the liquid ingredients, and for all of the flavors to diffuse completely through the marinade. When your marinade is complete, it's going to look something like this. You can see it's a very dark, slightly thick sauce. You can still see some of the dry ingredients floating around in there. That's okay. The pepper will never actually dissolve. You just want the flavor infused through the marinade. When your marinade has stood for an hour or 2, then you're ready to move on to the next step in the process. Now, when it comes to cutting our meat for our jerky, we want to cut it very, very thin. First of all, the thinner you cut it, the better the marinade will infuse into the meat and the better flavor you're going to have. Also, if you cut jerky too thick, it becomes extremely hard to bite and to chew. So the thinner you have it, the more enjoyable it will be as you eat it. Therefore, since I want to cut it literally 1/4 of an inch thick or thinner, no more than 1/4 of an inch in thickness, I'm going to cut my meat while it's completely frozen. Now that's going to be hard work, but it's going to be worth it in the long run. So literally I'm going to take my butcher knife, and the first cut I'm going to make is going to be a little thicker because I want to get a nice flat end on my meat. And this is where you can see that having a nice sharp knife really helps. It really pays off. And I'm just going to come in here and cut very, very thin. You see how thin that is? That is less than 1/4 of an inch, about 3/16 maybe at the most. Just very, very thin pieces of meat. And I'm going to just layer them into a marinating pan, 1 layer at a time. I already know how this turns out. So I'm looking at this and thinking this looks delicious already. I know what the end of this process is going to be. Okay, now, as you see, I have the bottom of my pan covered with one layer of my meat. And now I'm just going to take my marinade. I always like to stir it every time I go to use it. That way you get all of those dry ingredients mixed up in there. I'm going to take a little bit of my marinade using a measuring cup as a ladle, and I'm just going to ladle it over the top of the meat here just to get it good and moistened with that. Don't need to have it super thick in there yet. Just a little bit in there like that. And now that I have that layer of meat in my pan and marinated, I'm going to keep cutting my meat in these thick, thin pieces, but the second layer I'm going to lay it crossways. That'll help keep my pieces of meat from sticking together, because remember, they're still pretty frozen. They're going to be thawing. They'll kind of stick together if they're laying right on top of each other. Also, the fact that I'm laying them crossways will help allow the marinade to flow through in between the pieces of meat as they sit and marinate. So I'm going to keep cutting these and just pouring a little more marinade on top of each layer as I get through. And when I get all of this cut, we'll come back and talk some more. I failed to mention one thing that I do want to bring up that will be a big help to you, and you'll appreciate it whenever you make your jerky, and that is I'm cutting this meat across the grain. Meat has a grain, and so with jerky, if you cut it with the grain, it's going to be very hard to bite off and to chew. If you cut it across the grain, it tears really easily and makes it much more enjoyable to eat. So I'm going to finish cutting this roast and getting it into the pan. Now that I have all my meat sliced, I have it in my marinade pan, I have it soaking in my marinade, it's time to take the lid to the marinade pan and put it on and seal it down really, really good. And we want to let this meat marinate for at least 12 hours. Really, the longer the better. 24 hours would probably be ideal. But for me personally, in my busy life, I tend to do this at night and then begin the process of dehydrating it the next day. But 12 hours will work. I've always had real good luck with a 12-hour marinade. And every few hours while it's marinating, you want to take your marinade pan and flip it over so that it gets a good marinade all the way through both sides. It keeps the marinade stirring around in there and soaking from different directions into the meat. So we're going to marinate this in the refrigerator for about 12 hours. And we'll come back in the morning and we'll show you what the next step is. Well, it's the next morning, and my meat has been marinating in the refrigerator for about 16 hours. Now it's time to put it on the dehydrator and start making some jerky. Oh, does that smell good, and does it look good? You can tell the meat has really soaked up the marinade. You see a little bit of the dry ingredients like the pepper and such is settled on the meat itself, and that's really going to make some nice jerky. So now we're going to start the process of putting it on the dehydrator. Now, I have an American Harvest dehydrator that I've had for 23 or 24 years. It came with 2 trays, and I later got online and ordered 2 more. So I can make 4 trays of meat at a time, which is just about the right amount. I wouldn't want any more than that, but to make a nice amount of jerky at once. There are lots of dehydrators on the market. I'm not advocating for American Harvest necessarily, other than it's the one that I have, and it has worked great for me. So the first thing I want to do, pull my dehydrator in here, and I'm going to take these upper trays off. I like to fill my dehydrator trays while they're sitting on the dehydrator itself. That way anything that does drip just drips down into the drip tray of the dehydrator, and I can easily clean it up, and I don't make a lot of extra mess. I've also got this large bowl, and I'm going to come in, and I'm going to start by just pouring a little bit of this liquid off. You can see I dropped a couple of pieces of meat in there. By pouring a little bit of that liquid off, that's going to make this a little less messy as I'm pulling the meat out of here. I'm going to grab those couple of pieces that fell in here. Don't want to lose those. There they are. And now I've got a plate here with just a few layers of paper towel on it because I don't need my meat to be just dripping wet with marinade as I put it in there. So I'm going to start by putting a few pieces on a paper towel. And you can see some of these marbling lines, literally, once they've soaked in that marinade, they become so tender, they literally just fall apart into smaller pieces, which for the jerky, that is quite all right. So I'm just going to put several pieces on here, and just going to let them sit there, and then I'm going to turn them over just to kind of soak off some of the extra dripping marinade that's on there. And then we're going to start putting them on the tray. Now, as I put these on the tray, I want to fill the tray full. I want to get as much on as I can. So I want the pieces to be right up against one another, but I do not want them to be overlapping one another. If they're overlapping, then they will keep one another from actually dehydrating. The air can't circulate around them. But if they're just touching or just close to touching, that'll work fine. The air will flow around them that way. And as they begin to dehydrate, they will shrink up some, and so they will take less space, and the air will flow even more easily. And I'm just going to continue this process until all of my trays are full. Some of these bigger pieces, if they will come apart easily, I'll just pull them apart because I'd rather have a couple of somewhat smaller pieces than those huge pieces. And there's my first tray filled with meat. And you see I've got a pretty good coverage. There's a few holes here as I find some small pieces as I go down through. I may fill in some of those holes. But we want to fill all of our trays about like this with our meat. Now I've got the trays of my dehydrator all loaded and we are ready to go. So I'm going to take the lid to my dehydrator. I'm going to put it on top. My dehydrator has an adjustable thermostat. Not all dehydrators have that. But if you have one with an adjustable thermostat, I like to set mine at about 125 degrees. I find that works best. I can usually dehydrate 4 trays of meat in a day at 125 degrees using my process and get a nice slow dehydration that seals in all of that flavor and it doesn't dehydrate it so fast that it turns brittle and dry too quickly. So I'm going to take this dehydrator over to the counter. I'm going to plug it in and let it start running. Now, because naturally you're going to get more heat and more airflow to the bottom trays, what I'm going to do is all day long, about every hour, I'm going to come and I'm going to take the bottom tray and I'm going to lift it up and put it on top and set them back on the dehydrator. That way I'm continually rotating the trays in their position in the stack, always taking the bottom one, moving it to the top. Another hour later, taking the bottom one, moving it to the top. That really helps get your meat dehydrating more evenly all the way through the stack. Now, I had a little bit of meat left over that wouldn't fit on the trays this time, and that's okay. We can dehydrate that at a later time. I can put it in the refrigerator and do it tomorrow. I also may be able to do a little bit of this later on today, and I'll show you how I do that whenever that time comes. But I'm just going to take the marinade that I had poured off into this bowl and pour it back into my marinating pan. This way all of my meat is completely submerged in that marinade, and I don't have to worry about turning it anymore. And then I'm going to put the lid back on it, and I'm going to put this back into the refrigerator. But now I'm going to take the dehydrator over to the counter and plug it in and get to making some jerky. At this point, our jerky has been in the dehydrator for about 10 hours. I have shuffled the trays several times over the course of that time to get them to dehydrate evenly. At this point, we are going to help them along just a little bit. You can see here, I think, that the dehydration process is coming along nicely. They're starting to get nice and dried and a little bit brittle. They're still pretty soft and chewy. To help the process at this point, I'm going to take each tray and I'm going to take all of the pieces and turn them over. I don't do this until they are pretty far along in the dehydrating process. But this, number one, will help keep them from sticking. There was one there that if they had a little extra marinade on it, sometimes they'll kind of stick to the tray. Don't want them to stick to the tray too hard. But also, as the air flows up through the tray, this allows the air to hit them from a little different direction. Plus, by unsticking them from the tray, it allows the air to circulate around the pieces of meat better. I'm also going to push all of the pieces in so that they are nice and tight together. Now, you remember when we filled these trays, we had them filled pretty full at the time, but I told you that as the meat dehydrated, it would shrink, and it certainly has, because you can see this tray was full to begin with, but now as I'm moving the pieces closer together, you're going to see that I suddenly have a good portion of the tray that is empty as I have shifted them together. So I'm going to start pulling some pieces off of the next tray, turning them upside down, and I'm going to go ahead and fill in this tray so that it's nice and full. And the hope is that I can do that enough so that I might actually be able to take one tray off and have just dehydrating in 3 trays at this point. We'll see whether it works out exactly that way or not, but that's kind of what we're hoping for. My dehydrator's been going for about 15 hours now, and I think my jerky is pretty well ready to go. As I take it off and we take a look at these pieces, you see that they're nice, dry on the surface, and as you bend them, they crack. And not a lot of chewiness, not a lot of pull to it. This is just really how you want these. You want them to crack just a little bit like they're dry. Now, I had a couple pieces here. Here's one, for instance, that was really too thick. And you see this as you pull it. Now, it's a little bit chewy yet. I think this one will be okay. But, ideally, you don't want it to seem chewy. You don't want it to pull like rubber or something that's elastic. You want it to kind of break. So, a piece like that maybe need just a little bit more, but almost all of these are just right. So once you've got your meat to the consistency that you need it, got it dehydrated, then you can just put it in something that's airtight. I a lot of times will store mine in Ziploc bags. You can also seal it in a mason jar, or use some type of a bowl with a lid like a Tupperware, or like the semi-disposable Gladware bowls that seal nice and tight. You want it to seal airtight. More importantly, you want to seal out the moisture of the air that would get in and kind of reconstitute it and allow it to possibly begin to grow some bacteria or mold or something. But this jerky really came out just about right as far as the dehydrating is concerned. And to give it a taste, it's delicious. Now, using the jalapeno sauce from my candied jalapenos, this came out a little sweeter and a little hotter than what I'm used to. To be real honest, what you could make with the juice from banana peppers or chili peppers that you would buy from the store, honestly, I would like a little bit better, and so you'll really enjoy that. And that's how I make my famous venison jerky. This is something you could try with a deer roast, or you can do the exact same thing with a beef roast, and you can make a snack that you can enjoy whether you're hunting or whether you're just going to the ball game or just enjoying it around the house as you're watching TV with the family. So give this a try. You'll find it's really easy and really enjoyable. And thank you so much for watching.